Welcome to the pharmaphorum podcast. This is web editor Nicole Raleigh, and today I have with me Sandeep Kulkarni, CEO of Tourmaline Bio, and today we'll be discussing inflammation. Welcome, Sandeep.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, Tourmaline Bio is focused on addressing inflammation where it has the most immediate and meaningful impact in diseases with well-characterized inflammatory drivers and clear clinical need. To this end, we'll be focusing our conversation today on the heart, that is to say, the growing body of evidence on the role of inflammation in predicting heart health, as well as the impact of AI and GLP-1s on cardiology clinical trials and drug development. To begin with, though, Sandeep, perhaps you could share with listeners a little bit about yourself and an introduction, if you will, to the journey that has led you to today. I believe that you've also had a sojourn as an investor at one point.
That's right. Nicole, again, thank you to you and pharmaphorum for hosting this conversation and giving us a chance to tell you a little bit more about Tourmaline and what we're working on. In terms of my background, I am an MD by education, but I always loved clinical problem solving and medical innovation. And so, post medical school, I was eager to find a place where I could be at the place where those two things intersected. I made my way to the investing world, as you noted, where I was on the biotech team within a larger hedge fund. I absolutely loved being an investor. It's all the things you enjoy about medical school, learning about a new disease, understanding how it's treated today, and then thinking to yourself, well, how can we do better? How can we improve upon this, 5, 10 years from now? Um, Now, when you're an investor, it can be quite challenging. You can lose a lot of money or make a lot of money very quickly, especially when when you're investing in public companies, as I was. Uh, but this teaches you a set of skills where you learn how to read evidence very critically and force yourself to ask, why are you convinced this drug is going to work or not going to work in any given indication here? And so when we started Tourmaline about 3 years ago, we apply that the same lines of thinking for the indications that we are pursuing with our program here to really build conviction and confidence that if we design the right clinical trial, that there's a signal here that not only is going to be positive, but will make sense and will be something that helps address an unmet need within the real world. So we came together about 3 years ago around a program that we licensed from Pfizer. We have a monoclonal antibody that binds to an important immune signaling molecule called interleukin 6 or IL-6. And we've been really excited about how do we take this known biology and emerging biology and apply it to new areas supported by strong types of evidence. Now, the idea that inflammation matters for the cardiovascular system is really not a new one. It's gone back for literally centuries. A recognition that in the context of heart disease or plaques that form within the coronary arteries of the heart, immune infiltration has been clearly seen. However, we don't yet have like a really great targeted therapeutic to reduce inflammation in the context of heart disease. So it's an area where the biology is crystal clear. The clinical data we think points in the right direction. However, to date, it's been underexplored here. So we're kind of we think the precipice where what used to be called the inflammatory hypothesis for cardiovascular disease is probably now more like the inflammatory theory for cardiovascular disease. And I think we're at the point where very quickly this is going to be seen as as fact here that inflammation drives worse cardiovascular outcomes. The place where I think this gets even more exciting is when you take a step back to think about the potential here where, I think we'll talk more about, the process of atherosclerosis, meaning process of plaque formation, progression, rupture that leads to complications like heart attack, stroke, things that, we all are familiar with. But the potential of inflammation extends beyond just atherosclerosis, could extend to thrombosis, clot formation, as well as arrhythmogenesis, causing arrhythmias, and others, including aneurysm formation expansion here. So I'm not sure folks in the field have truly appreciated how much of a sea change this could be, but the biology we think is really quite exciting.
It is exciting. So let's unpack some of that, and thank you for sharing that, Sandeep. So you mentioned then this shift from hypothesis to theory when it comes to inflammation. So let's tunnel down on that. So, turning to the role of inflammation in predicting the risks of cardiovascular events, there is, as you've been saying, this growing body of evidence on the role of inflammation in disease, not just heart disease. And that includes the predictors of heart health. And indeed, the British Heart Foundation has stated that chronic inflammation is a culprit in many heart and circulatory conditions, including atherosclerosis, which you mentioned, the plaque buildup, which can lead to heart attacks and even strokes. So perhaps we could break down this now theory rather than hypothesis on inflammation before turning to what you mentioned also the sort of clinical trial angle and drug development angle with this knowledge.
So heart disease is, to state the obvious, is complicated. There's many different types of heart disease, and even within a given type of heart disease, there could be, multiple processes happening within it. All right, and so over the last, I would say, kind of century, we as a field have gotten better about addressing a number of risk factors that patients have. I would put LDL, lipid, just cholesterol levels as being an important predictor of risk. We have, good tools to lower LDL, namely in the form of statins, other medications that have been approved, all those that are continuing to be developed with good medications to address diabetes, good medications to address blood pressure. However, inflammation almost certainly is a contributor here to heart disease in its many forms. And so what I think many folks thought of as being a passive process of lipid accumulations within blood vessels is very clearly the evidence would support that that is an active process, all orchestrated by the immune system. This doesn't mean that LDL levels aren't important. Of course, statins are great medications. We all should be consider being on them if we have any number of heart disease risk factors. However, inflammation kind of stands out as being a risk factor that we just haven't well addressed today here. The comment you made from the British Heart Foundation, I think, really nicely summarizes point that most physicians recognize that inflammation is important, yet we just don't yet have a really good tool to address it. And we're all kind of waiting. We're waiting and working on generating the data to really formally prove just how effective this path could be. Now, when we think about the role of inflammation and the evidence for it, what we find impressive and frankly overwhelming is just how much evidence there is fitting into different types of evidence that all triangulate and converge upon the same idea that inflammation has a causal role in driving worse heart outcomes. And that comes in a number of different flavors. Epidemiologic studies looking at markers of inflammation, including IL-6 levels directly as being predictors of risk, as well as genetic evidence that validates targets, including IL-6, as a causal factor in driving again, like worse heart outcomes. And then clinical trial data that all kind of point to this idea that inflammation matters and that IL-6 is a strong target to be going after to be able to address that inflammatory risk here. So we're not relying upon any one publication, but when you kind of look through the literature, it is impressive just how many publications there are, how many different groups being involved here. And so, I use the phrase the inflammatory hypothesis, where I think we think it's kind of transitioning to the inflammatory theory and very quickly will be inflammatory fact for heart disease. But this is kind of just built upon just dozens upon dozens of publications that all kind of yield a converging story. All while, of course, we and others have to generate the formal data to prove that point of what the benefit is by using a drug such as this one or others in reducing cardiovascular events.
Thank you, Sandeep. So we will be looking more closely at some trial data on the role of IL-6, but let's just sort of shift left, if you will, and look at drug development now
Yeah,
and the heart-centered challenges in terms of the wellness term inflammaging coming
yeah,
into clinical trials, as well as honing in on age-related diseases more generally.
yeah. I'm glad you asked that question. The this is an exciting area of emerging biology, in one that I think the field is just now starting to scratch the surface on. And so the term inflammaging is a portmanteau of inflammation and aging, and driven by this belief that inflammation may be kind of at the root of the processes that we associate with aging, disease processes, namely, heart disease, cancer. neurodegeneration. Our focus area, to date has been on, heart disease, where, it's not surprised that as you get older, folks have higher event rates due to heart disease, and it still is the largest contributor to global disease burden, heart disease in its many, in its many forms. Now, but that idea that the same kind of underlying inflammatory processes here may drive adverse outcomes when it comes to neurodegeneration, as I mentioned, or cancer. That data continue to emerge. Now, in the popular kind of discourse, there's been a lot of focus on diet and exercise, and I think now the scientific community is starting to parse through mechanisms here and build evidence to see if there are ways that we might be able to use pharmacologic manipulation of different pathways for patient benefit in the areas I mentioned: neurodegeneration, cancer, and of course heart disease. IL-6 does come up as being an important part in those areas, but this is where there are a lot of pathways that are at play here, and as we as a field get smarter about what those pathways are, I think we'll have better tools here. But yeah, we've been really impressed by just how much popular interest there is in inflammation, and I think the field is now starting to catch up. Scientific field is starting to catch up to say, well, how do we actually again pick apart the mechanisms here and develop therapeutics around it?
Absolutely. And you mentioned popular interest there and diet and exercise and pharmacologic intervention. So it goes without saying that we can't get away from the impact of AI and GLP-1s in general terms these days. So, what about their impact on cardiology, clinical trials, and drug development?
Yeah. So the I mean, medicine tends to be incremental by its very nature. We build upon advances, others build upon those, and the cycle continues on. And so when I think about the role of like GLP-1 agonists, it's been really very exciting. I mean, these are important medications that have produced what I call stellar, improvements, not just for diabetes and reducing A1C, or not just on obesity, where of course the impact is very easy to measure, but even more broadly, things like heart disease, where the outcomes data is strong, sleep apnea, addiction. These are just really important breakthroughs, and I think we're all excited about understanding the full potential here. I think the knock-on implication of that has been even more important, where pharma had sort of started to get out of, or had gotten out of, cardiovascular disease in the 2010s, preferring more go after smaller indications, niche populations, shorter studies. But it's the GLP-1s have really, forced the pendulum in the other direction, and uh, forced forced folks in our field to think about how do we go after big indications that have real unmet need effect, not just a few thousands of people, but millions of people here. Now, the data for the GLPs almost certainly is driven by the impact, or the partial impact it does have on inflammation, and most folks in the field believe that the GLP-1 agonists at least are partial anti-inflammatory drugs here, with as measured by key blood-based biomarkers of inflammation, namely high sensitivity C-reactive protein, which gets widely tracked and has been in the literature for decades. We think this is really exciting and overall de-risks and advances the idea that inflammation is an important component of of heart disease, and could be modifiable, and supports the idea that hsCRP is an important marker of that inflammatory risk, which a drug like ours produces a deep, profound impact upon hsCRP as well, as we talk about later on. So I think this is all all kind of the same line of inquiry here of how to think about inflammation, how to use that. The GLPs certainly are part of that story, but it does raise the question of, can we use a direct acting anti-inflammatory to even do better for heart outcomes compared to what we see for drugs that may be working via partial anti-inflammatory effects. Now, in terms of AI, I think we're still like early days of how AI is factoring into cardiovascular disease care. The CV field is rightfully been focused on hard outcomes, so running studies that look at hard outcomes, meaning heart attacks, stroke, cardiovascular death, things where there's no ambiguity. Now, the challenge here is that these trials are large, can take a long time to run, but there's been growing interest in efforts to use AI and imaging to better imaging that along with AI to kind of read those images to better assess who may be at high risk of future events. And you can see why using imaging and AI to support that could make sense, and maybe even stronger in certain cases than just looking at a systemic blood biomarker imaging may show you more clearly what's actually happening in the parenchyma of the heart or other organs, including assessing whether there's inflammation that's present that could be addressed. Here, and there are signs that the agency, the FDA in particular, is open to at least considering and thinking through how we might be able to use tech tools, including AI, including imaging, to speed up the timeline to get important medicines to patients. So early days, but I think this is an area that will continue to grow in interest.
Thank you, Sandeep. And I must admit, I've never had anyone refer to it as a glip. So thank you for that insight as well as the broader insights on GLP-1s and AI.
Here to help.
Looking at the data, though, let's turn to Tourmaline's data. And Tourmaline Bio now has positive top-line data from its phase 2 Tranquility trial for its IL-6 inhibitor for the treatment of atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, or ASCVD, and is well positioned to execute on its cardiovascular inflammation strategy. So I was wondering if you could tell us more about that trial data.
Yep, that would be my pleasure. Taking a step back, our drug candidate, pacibartug, is a fully human, long-acting anti-IL-6 antibody that neutralizes interleukin-6, again, this key immune signaling molecule. The antibody already has shown what we think are best-in-class properties, where we've achieved a long dosing interval, longer than anyone has shown to date, and have pushed that even further in our current Tranquility trial, showing the viability of quarterly dosing. In the study, as we'll talk through, we see rapid, deep, durable reductions in that key biomarker, high sensitivity hsCRP that I mentioned before, on the order of 85% plus reductions from baseline in this key biomarker, all while also demonstrating a safety profile that looks comparable to placebo in terms of the event rate. So the trial itself was designed as a multi-arm dose ranging pharmacokinetic pharmacodynamic study to help us pick a dose that we would want to take forward into future development within cardiovascular disease. We rolled 143 patients in the study to one of three drug arms or to placebo, and then measure the primary endpoint at day 90. And what we see is what I described: rapid, deep, durable reductions in that key biomarker, hsCRP, measured any number of ways, whether in terms of percent change from baseline or percent of patients who fall below this key threshold for hsCRP of getting below 2, where the belief is that correlates with improved benefit regarding cardiovascular disease events. So, and again, the safety profile was, we think, very strong, all with quarterly administration, which is particularly impressive given in this study, patients had only received a single dose of study drug in the quarterly arms at the time the primary endpoint was measured at day 90. So this positions us well for the future. There's a recognition within the cardiovascular disease field that less frequent administration drives that could drive better outcomes. We're talking about prevention of disease. Patients can forget to take medications, but a drug that can be given once every quarter, we think, presents real advantages over others in the field that are looking at more frequent administration here. Just big thing, keeping in mind that there's a ton of white space here. This is really just uncharted territory here. A lot of different indications to go after, and so we are excited about Tranquility for what we could do in ASCVD, but then more broadly, be able to take the data here, pick a dose, and then explore new areas of biology where the evidence is compelling, but we have a chance to be first and really generate new data to help inform and highlight a new use case for this mechanism. Abdominal aortic aneurysm kind of fits that bill, we think, quite well, where it certainly has overlap with atherosclerosis and atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. It is a distinct indication for which most would agree that the standard of care is just suboptimal. There's strong genetic data linking IL-6 to AAA. There's strong epidemiologic data looking at IL-6 levels as being associated with larger AAAs, and then the experimental data in animal models again supports a role here. So really exciting to be able to take the results from Tranquility and be able to again push the envelope and look at new areas where the biology makes scientific sense.
Absolutely. And for those listeners who want a little bit more detail on that latter part, Tourmaline Bio is planning to initiate phase 2 in abdominal aortic aneurysm, or AAA, as compelling genetic and other evidence support this IL-6 inhibition as a promising strategy for treating AAA And AAA, for a little bit more detail, is a silent killer occurring in over 2 million people in the US and accounting for 4% to 5% of sudden deaths. The condition occurs when the wall of the aorta weakens, leading to a risk of rupture, which can cause life-threatening bleeding. So exciting science indeed, Sandeep, much potential. My final question: what are your predictions or hopes for the future of this field of research and development broadly? And if you will, what does your heart tell you?
Thank you for that question. I think maybe I'll answer it two ways. Like one, what we think this means in heart disease, and then maybe even more what we think this could mean more broadly. My heart tells me that we are finally at the precipice of tackling a risk factor that may be the biggest source of risk that patients faced and has not been well addressed to date. Um, I think everyone in our field, has personal stories here, personal motivations for why we do the things that we do. I think about my father as being the kind of person who has had kind of every heart complication, been through a bypass, been through multiple stents. He has high CRP. I believe he would benefit from a drug like this, and so I realize it's anecdotal, but I think it just kind of points out that what we're doing here has real world implications for people that we know, that we love, we interact with on on any given day of our lives here. More broadly, I really am hopeful that the ideas of inflammaging will continue to get traction, and we will continue to push the envelope on the science here and really pick apart mechanisms here that kind of drive complications, including the most feared ones of aging, and use that information to design better medications here. So certainly storylines I think will play out over the next several years.
Thank you, Sandeep. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Nicole.
And that concludes another episode of the pharmaphorum podcast. You can find more information about this episode, including a download link and information about previous installments at pharmaphorum.com/podcasts. The pharmaphorum podcast is also available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Overcast, Pocket Casts, Podbean, and pretty much wherever else you download your other podcasts from. Just search for pharmaphorum and follow and hit subscribe. Of course, don't forget to visit our website itself, where you can sign up for daily and weekly news and analysis bulletins. And do follow us on Blue Sky and LinkedIn at pharmaphorum. That's all for now. Thank you for listening.